Okay, I have a dreadful habit of speaking far, far too fast. Okay, and I speak far too fast most of the time for people who are native English speakers to be able to understand me. So I'm going to try really, really hard to slow down. But if I do talk too fast, please just say so. Just tell me to shut up. Tell me to slow down. So I'm not sure if you were raising your hand already saying I'm talking too fast. That would be a great start. And then also, I gather that this is being translated into English into Russian as I speak along. So again, I hope I'm speaking clearly enough for that. So first of all, before I start, can I just have a quick show of hands? Who here is a game developer? Okay. And if you're not game developers, what other businesses are you here? Fine. Okay. Application developer. Who's an application developer then? Okay, who's not an application developer or a games developer then? Okay, so what are you then?
Book publisher.
Book publisher. Book.
Yeah.
I can't help you. I'm going to go.
So what?
Okay.
Get the money back then.
Yeah, okay, fine. I'll give you a later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what this presentation is about taking games or applications, but mainly games, because that's really what we do, to China. Who here, in a show of hands, is already distributing in China? Great. And who here is interested in distributing in China? Great, okay, that's a good start. Okay. So, can you all see that okay? Okay. Oh, fantastic, great, okay. So I work for a company called Papaya. Papaya is an Android social gaming network. I have to make sure those words are all in the right order. What we do is we take Android games and we distribute them around the world and we monetize them. We have about 70 million members, we have 200 plus games, and we have global distribution. But the reason that we're here talking about China, the reason I'm here talking about China, is that we're a Chinese company. And although we have heaps and heaps of users in the US, we also have a significant number of users in China. And it's that expertise of distributing games in China that I'm here to talk about. In terms of our growth, we've been going since 2008, and we started out as games publishers ourselves. And then as we built the games up, we then decided that we could introduce a social network layer on top, which is where the Papaya Android social network came from. And we've grown since then, and we've just launched a new initiative called AppFlood. AppFlood sits alongside our Papaya social network, and AppFlood is a cross-promotion install network. It's a way of swapping installs in your games. So if later on anybody wants to talk to me about that, I'll be in the bar or at the party later, and we can talk about that. So we have two services, Android social network and AppFlood, which is an install exchange. The reason why users like Papaya is that we have a social layer that sits on top of games. So you bring your games into the Papaya social network, then the users can play, they can monetize through, developers can monetize through virtual currency, they can discuss, they can share, they can boast, they can brag. It's all about saying, these are all the great things that I can do as a player with my games. And the reason why you guys, developers, like it is because it's monetization. And Android, as we know, has had a real problem with monetization in the past. Because unlike some other app stores out there, it's not as though the credit card details are held so readily. And so what we do for developers is we take your games in and we make it easy to monetize those. AppFlood, as I've already said, sits alongside all of these, and it's a cross-promotion install network. Whoops. And a few of the partners that we work with, Lenovo, Emobi, Sega, China Mobile, there's a whole heap of people who are plugged in some way into the Papaya network, whether it's through AppFlood or through a social network. So, on to China. China is a really, really interesting market for all mobile content. It's interesting because it's growing quickly, but it's also interesting because it's extremely fragmented and it's not obvious how you actually get your hands on those users and how you monetize them. We can see here that app sessions are growing hugely over in China, and as a percentage of device activations, the number in China are growing hugely. All of this is saying that the market in China is growing and it's out there to be monetized. Having said that, though, there are some issues. There's still some catching up to do. China may be a great market in terms of size. There are lots of people out there and they may have handsets, but in monetization, it still lags behind. And it's not obvious how quickly it's going to catch up. But in terms of other good news, For virtual goods, in-app purchases, these guys really, really like spending. There is a natural propensity towards spending in their games industry for virtual goods in-app purchase that you don't see elsewhere. Some of this comes from a lot of the most successful games out in China, started out by combating piracy by saying, you know what, we're not going to make this game a premium game, we're going to give the game away free, and then the monetization will come on the server through virtual goods. And that's really how we started with our games. And so it means that as a culture they have grown up spending more on in-app purchases as a percentage than elsewhere. Gaming revenues are expected to grow in China and to grow significantly. And the percentage I've already mentioned of in-app purchases will continue to grow over and above advertising. All of which is creating a picture of this great market that is there to be had. And a general overview, online games typically making at least 64% of the purchases, and consoles being much more of a grey area. Consoles is something where it's still not clear where that will develop in China. There are rule changes coming out, and that could well mean that they become more successful. But we believe that the mobile gaming will be exceeding PC gaming as we move forward. So, if it's such a great market, why aren't we all in there right now? One of the issues with China, in terms of taking games out there, is fragmentation. It's a much, much more complicated ecosystem. It's much more complicated in terms of the number of app stores out there. It's much more complicated in terms of the media that you need to talk to out there. It's much more complicated in terms of handset fragmentation, etc., etc. In certain Western markets, we're used to there being one particular app store that we need to go to, and that's who we need to market. That is not the case in China. And this is a really interesting slide, just in terms of the number of people that one can deal with. And if you look here in terms of app stores, there are so many more app stores, each of which can be significant in terms of the revenue that they can drive. And certainly I spend most of my time talking to developers in Europe, and the typical strategy seems to have been, I'll start with iOS or I'll start with Android in Europe, I'll build a couple of games as a success, get some cash flow coming in, and then look to expand out of there. Here, you can't really do that, because there is no particular gold mine that you can go to in the first instance. It's so much more fragmented, and that brings with it its own issues. So what sort of barriers do you have before you can go out and make money in China? Well, obviously cultural and behavioural. It's a different market in many, many respects. Localization, actually making sure that the games work and can be understood out there. The App Store fragmentation that I've already mentioned. And the copying of IP. You know, this can be an issue. And this is something where we relate to the partnerships. It's important to find a partner out there that you can work with, because IP can be misappropriated out there. And as a legal framework, if it is misappropriated, it's harder to understand how you can get redress for that. Really, if you're going into the Chinese market, you really need to have a partner with you who understands all of these issues. And there are restrictions on foreign companies. So, if you do go into China, how can you make money? Oh, by the way, guys, can you all hear me okay? Is this all speed? Is this all okay? Yep, fantastic. So how can you make money? What are the billing channels that you can use? Well, we can work with you on that. So we have a billing SDK, and we work with most of the majority of the channels out there. And we can also work with you in terms of the distribution. But as I've said, there's no official Google Play Store out there. Carriers can be difficult to work with, and you really do need local partners in terms of building relationships. So what are some of the specifics of these? Well, I spoke to my guys in marketing before I came out here, and I said, look, just give me a breakdown of some of the app stores out there and the sorts of downloads per day that one can expect. And these are some of the sort of the app stores out there and what you can expect to generate. What's interesting, as I said earlier on, is there's no one particular app store that one can go to drive all of your downloads. It really is significant fragmentation. And within that, you then have to work very, very hard, like you do with the Google App Store, like you do with iOS, to actually try and get placements within those app stores. But from a cultural perspective, obviously you can see here some of the Papaya games that we've had features in terms of some of the placements, cute little faces up there with the red marks around them. But you have to be working to do that across all of the apps, all of the stores that you're working with. The other element to the Chinese market, which is a little bit interesting if you're used to dealing with iOS and with Google, is the importance of bulletin boards out there and the importance of bulletin boards which will then have editorial wrapped around them and be used to distribute mobile games. This is something that I hadn't really seen until I joined Papaya, but this is a really, really good example where there'll be third-party app stores, they'll run some editorial, they'll be mainly based around a PC web browser, but they can drive huge numbers of downloads within 48 hours, within 2 or 3 days. And these are just not some of the things that we see over in the West. It's not as though there are PC-based app stores that can drive significant mobile traffic. Another example here. And then we come to the OEMs and the carriers. OEMs and carriers are to some extent a holy grail out in China in terms of who you can work with. If you get them right, they can drive huge amounts of brand awareness, but they're very, very difficult to get the deals in place, and they tend to be the sorts of deals where there'll be no billing or no monetization. So we say if you're going to do deals with OEMs and carriers, be prepared for those deals mainly to be brand building exercises. And at Papaya, we've placed embeds with handset manufacturers like Lenovo and Motorola out there, and those have been great for brand awareness, but it's not as though you'll typically look back at the revenue on those and say we made a huge amount of money. And again, some of the examples of the embeds that we've done in the past. Media and marketing, essential, as it is anywhere, but again, having the relationships with the local press and knowing who to target, absolutely essential. And then social media. But again, the social media is different. So they have Weibo, we have Twitter. You need to have the Weibo followers to actually go out and promote your games. We've got about 100,000 following our CEO, Shen Si. But again, if you are used to using Twitter and Facebook to promote your games, out there, that isn't going to do you any good whatsoever. So, after having painted that mixed picture, some of it good, some of it less good, in terms of Chinese distribution. Is it a market that's worth pursuing? Is it something that you guys should be going after? Yes is the short answer, and I won't be doing this presentation if that wasn't the answer. Yes is the short answer. However, I think it's important to stress that one of the things you will get from distribution in China initially is a lot of brand building. I wouldn't be building a huge revenue model based on exporting Western games to China right now. Android installations are on the uptick. It will only become more lucrative, but right now I think it is much more of a brand building exercise as opposed to adding huge amounts of money to your bottom line, as we have seen from the lower payments we saw earlier on. There could be some hugely successful games that can be transported. We have a game called Papaya Farm. That was very, very big on iOS in the West before we moved it over to China. And there are a number of games that have been well localized, where they've looked at the sorts of titles that do very well and that have come over. Papaya Farm I've already mentioned. Zombie Zombie, a great title and great ARPUs. Rage of Barmut, very similar. And the sorts of developers that we can bring over and have brought over to China, a huge range, whether it is Bulky Pix, whether it is Big Blue Bubble, any of these guys that we have taken using Western games and taken them over successfully to China. So it can be done. There's just an element of just having to be very, very aware of what you're looking to achieve. And that is what I wanted to cover. Thank you very much, guys. Questions?
Could you go a little bit more about how the bulletin boards work in terms of marketing in China?
Sure. They fulfill two roles. One of them is just a pure distribution role, and the second role is an editorial role. And so one of the things that took me a while to get my head around is that some of the bulletin boards out there will have an editorial voice in a way that perhaps a pocketgamer.biz will do over in the West. And so it's important to treat those less as hobbyist sites, which is what I tended to do in the early days, and saying actually these guys see themselves as serious games journalists. They write opinions on games, and it's very important to court them in that respect. So I would treat them very, very much as any other mainstream games media.
Если у кого-то есть вопросы на русском, пожалуйста, можете задавать, вопрос будет переведен на английский язык. Do you working with China social networks like Renren or some others, and what is the impact on the market they have?
Like any social network marketing, it can drive a lot of awareness, it can drive a lot of installs, it's hugely important. The numbers, however, are just that much bigger. And I think that's one of the most important things to stress about taking games to China. The market's huge, the potential installs are huge, the social networks, the number of followers that you can get are huge. But when you actually look to translate that to downloads and to revenue, it is a fraction of what you can get in the West. And this is what I was saying about brand building. China is a hugely important market, and we're taking games out there that are proven to be very, very successful. But I think the real reward will be coming in 18 to 24 months, particularly as Android and as iOS penetration really gets going. So to answer your question, social networks are important, but you have to have many, many, many thousands of followers to drive to move the needle, to drive the difference. And that's where having a partnership, I think, is really important, because it's not realistic to expect to build those yourself if you're not based in China.
Hi, Chris. Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Question is, can you please name, like, I don't know, a couple of the games that you mentioned you took from Chinese and Japanese market, and they did, amazingly good in Western markets? Just examples.
Yeah, I think the best example we have of a game that went that way from China over to the West is a game called X City. X City. And X City was built by a team of 8 guys in Beijing. It was built using the Papaya game engine, which is one of the reasons why I like it. But it's not just that. And it's a very strong social title. And what they did was they really understood that you had to build all the social elements of gameplay, all the social elements right into the gameplay. So it's a farm game, it's all about crops, it's about, it's all the sort of typical stuff, it's farming, it's city building, but they got the gifting elements really right. So if me and you would have a farm, I could come to your farm, I could give you stuff, but more than that, I can then see your friends, and I can then go and stalk your friends, and then I can then go and give your friends stuff, even if they necessarily don't want it, and I can then follow everyone around. And what they got really right was that social graph, and they did that brilliantly. And that makes $1,500, $2,000 a day net still, and it launched in August of last year, not in August of this year. And that game translated really well. And the other thing those guys did, which sounds obvious, but I think as developers we often miss out, is they treated the game as a service. So what they did was they are constantly updating the game. It could be Valentine's Day, it could be Halloween, it could be Christmas, it could be the tomb sweeping ceremony, it could be anything. And at every opportunity they seem to find a reason to bring in extra virtual goods that have got themes and seasonality around them. And so when it was Halloween, they did a lovely Halloween promotion where you could buy vampire trees and gravestones and things. And it really meant that you wanted to go back in and play because you knew that window on those virtual goods would be closed after a week or two. So what they did, great socialization and great games as a service with the seasonality, and that was just done brilliantly.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm here, yeah. On the fragmentation again, please
Yes.
cover it. What do you mean in fragmentation? Speaking on collecting money from,
Yeah.
you have many channels, right?
Yes.
You have different application stores, but
Yeah.
speaking on device operational system, how many systems?
To be honest, no one really knows. So there is a huge grey market. Oh, we focus almost exclusively on Android. Yeah, so as I said, we're an Android social gaming network. Simply because at least Android gives some ability to stabilize the device fragmentation. For us, they're not so significant. In China, generally, I mean, certainly feature phones are very dominant over there. And one of the reasons why we've seen growth in China is that Android penetration is rising, but it's on a very, very low base.
So basically, what is your expectation on the market share of Android? It is growing, you say,
Oh,
right?
hugely.
So basically, it's going to dominate the market.
I would say so, yes. I mean, that's certainly what
This
we're
is
seeing.
why you actually focus on it,
Yes,
right?
I mean,
Thanks.
yeah, absolutely.
More questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Are you prepared for the crossing to Windows 8?
That's a great question. Prepared makes it sound like if we weren't, that would be that we weren't prepared, as opposed to having decided not to do it. We are still working out what we should do in terms of other platforms. Our heartland is Android. Then we also have iOS on top of that, and we have that for AppFlood as well. So AppFlood, the cross-promotional network, we're launching iOS on that in about 2 weeks. At the moment, we're not doing anything with Windows. We keep revisiting that. We keep looking at it again. For us, we have 75 million users. We really need tens and tens of millions of users to move the needle to make it worthwhile. So, are we prepared? No, but that's deliberate. Anyone else?
You mentioned Papaya engine.
Yes.
What is it?
Papaya, the Papaya engine is a game engine. It's a 2D game engine that works particularly well building in social features. And again, we go back to the social graph. We go into gifting, boasting, bragging, all those sorts of things. So all the details are on the Papaya website, and I can talk you through that later if you'd like me to. But it's a great way of building very social 2D games, and it's very quick. It's a good game engine. It's not a 3D monster that you can use for alien blasting, but for social 2D games, it's fantastic.
Do you distribute it for free?
Yes. Yeah. Oh yes.
And but for example, if developer will use your engine, they should distribute his game just through Papaya network.
Well, what we do with Papaya is you develop your game, okay, and then you put the game on Android stores. So it could be Amazon, it could be Google, it could be any one of those.
And this is just for Android market, right?
Well,
engine.
yeah, yes, essentially. I mean, that's what I would use it for. We also have Unity plugins as well. And so a lot of the developers we're talking now are building in Unity, and then they're putting in Papaya or AppFlood using Unity. And that's probably the most common way to go.
Чуть-чуть он все-таки не договорил по бизнес-модели, что дальше происходит?
Just a second.
Это, в общем, развитие.
Здравствуйте, это общество развития было там вопрос, а что дальше происходит? Разработали приложение, отдали Papaya, что дальше происходит? Да, вот это то, что вы спрашивали.
So the question is, after that, the developer will finish the game on your engine and will give it to you for distribution. What next?
Yeah, great question. And I think that is the difference between a number of the different social platforms that are out there. It's what is the marketing that you're going to get back. A typical developer negotiation would go something like what you've just said. If I use your game engine, what will you do for me? And what we'll then turn around is we'll put together a marketing package which is based on all the mechanics that we have within the Papaya social network. For example, let me be specific, we send out P-mails, and P-mails are our version of emails that go out to all of our users. So we have a game that went live yesterday, and all of our users are receiving a P-mail right now saying, have you tried this game? So it's a version of just inboxing them somehow. We also, the users have avatars. Those avatars can have virtual gifts or goods or items. So I did a gambling game. We did a poker visor for the gambling game as a giveaway, so that they could then boast to their friends that they had this particular characterization. So there are a list of things that we can do to promote the game within the Papaya world. Advertising, direct emails, avatars. There are also forums within Papaya where people can talk about games. And what we'll do is we'll promote those forums and make those forums more visible on the deck. So there's a list of marketing mechanics that we've put together, and that will form part of any agreement or contract.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.